Yo, folks, welcome back to our Zevi and I's continued romp through through the Yanuka. Sad to say that we're kind of coming close to the end. I think in the next few sessions we may be wrapping up this section. But we have some plans. We're not sure about exactly how they'll look, but we have some plans about how we might capstone this study project. But Zevi, welcome back.
Good to be back with you, Justin. Great to be here.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. I'm excited to be nearing the end, and excited for what we have planned for the end. Watch this space, as they say.
Yeah. We have some plans to celebrate our study. I really do feel like it does feel like that sort of like after you finish Masechta of the Talmud, you can have a little party. I feel like we deserve that. You shouldn't have to finish an entire parsha of Zohar to have a party. If you get through any chunk of it, you should feel welcome to celebrate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that tradition of making a siyum, a conclusion, is a very beautiful one, and it's a very rich tradition. And there's a whole prayer we say. We thank the text, we thank in this case it will be the Zohar, and we say Hadran Halach will return to you, like we hope to see her again. It's a very beautiful celebration that we Jews do, and it's a bittersweet moment, but we are getting there soon.
We are getting there. So any thoughts from last time before we dive into I feel like last time we were really in the muck of the muck of Malchut, the worst kind of like xenophobia and violence, and just the stuff that is some of the most uncomfortable stuff and in any religious text, but also in a text that's otherwise so beautiful. And I feel like we're going to go straight back into the highest realms of the angelic beings in this one. So it's really a roller coaster, the Yanuka.
It's very much been a roller coaster. And I was thinking about, like, I've been thinking this whole time, like, what are the themes connecting us between the sections that we're reading? Like, are they just like unrelated, like a string of pearls of like one homiletic drush here and another drush there and another homily here, and I'm still trying to figure out what it is that's binding them all together, and maybe by the end we'll have a bit more clarity. But I think this whole, one thing which jumped out to me, which is very, very basic, almost like too basic to say, but is like this basic belief that the Kabbalists see a dual narrative and a dual reality, and that's both in the text of the Torah and it's in reality itself, in history, a dual narrative there, and it's all like just plotting out this dual narrative between our terrestrial reality and this erotic reality, and that sometimes is beautiful, and sometimes it's ugly, and sometimes it's courageous, and sometimes it's hideous, but it's all part of the reality which they're unpacking and exploring. And as we said, we don't pick and choose our traditions. We don't pick and choose our texts. We pick and choose how we read them and what we do with them. And ignoring the ugly is certainly not a healthy approach either.
Right. And I think ignoring the ugly would be like a real betrayal of the Kabbalistic legacy that thinks of redemption as something that's coming for everything. And also, there's no way to find everything if you don't go looking at the ugly too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that would be a real active betrayal to ignore the parts we don't like or make us uncomfortable. That would be the height of at some level, the height of betrayal. And I agree with you. I'm wondering what's connecting all this. And I guess it's not a theme unique to the Yanuka, but it's just a sort of a Zohar motif. Is just like the Sefirot and this sort of extreme dynamism, where we're kind of zooming in and out and up and down, and the text, I don't know, has a kind of literary vertigo that one can experience, because you're constantly moving, and you're constantly moving registers of analysis. You're moving registers of reality up and down constantly.
Yeah.
You're zooming into very particular tiny, and this talk will get down to the very tiniest Hebrew letter, right? And then you zoom back out to this incredibly wide thing. So I think it's just the vertigo-inducing momentum and dynamism of the Zohar as a text, but really captured really beautifully in this shorter pericope of Yanuka.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. The literary vertigo. And that certainly is. And I think I think in many ways, what we're doing here is a challenge because we're trying to find the right level of analysis and the correct level of speed to move through this text. And I think it's very much just an opening, just an introduction. And like a lot of the times we'll be discussing this throughout, and we'll say this is Tiferet, this is Malchut, this is Keter, and it takes a considerable amount of study to know what those terms mean and how they're being applied. And I think for people that feel maybe it's somewhat daunted by this, like they should see this as an introduction, spend some time, with our content, with other creators putting out good work to explore what these labels, what these code words are, and then hopefully come back to the series with an understanding like, oh, that's what chesed meant, and that's what tiferet meant, and that's what netzach meant, and because obviously we can't unpack all of that just here.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of netzach, we should next time. I'd love to do a study on netzach and hod and how they don't get. They really don't get to. So maybe counting the Omer be a cool time to jump in when we get some netzach and hod stuff, because they really get short shrift in the conversation. It's and they're connected to prophecy and stuff like that, and I really feel like that they're interesting sefirot that don't get their day in the sun.
Yeah. Justin, have you done an episode on the Sefirot?
I did an episode on the very, very early origin of them.
Right, correct.
So I've done that just because I think that's the thing that doesn't get talked a lot about how they developed. But I've not done one on the Sefirot ipso facto, because I just feel, it's such a big topic.
Yeah.
Because how far do you go forward? Into the Arizal, where they're all nested in with one another, and you have all they're all nested in. So it's just such a daunting. And you have to deal with the psychologization of them, but in the Hasidic movement that you're very familiar with, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's just like and then the other answer would be, could you just do episodes on each sefirah?
Right.
That would just be that's more of a Zevi style, thing. But I don't know. I don't feel like if I were to do one, I would do one maybe on how they appear in the Zohar or something like that. Get it a little bit more localized. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the specificity that you bring to the subjects and how you want to keep them grounded with a text. And that's definitely something very beautiful and admirable. I did like an hour-long piece on a psychologized iteration of the Sefirot as seen through a Hasidic lens. I think it was 2 Sefirot HaOmers ago, a time where the Sefirot are front and center in the Hasidic mind and Jewish mind in general.
Yeah, maybe that'd be a time to do it.
Yeah, that might be an interesting idea. And there definitely is. I have one of my greatest regrets is that I gave a class on one of the Sefirot in particular, on Keter, and I thought it was a great class, and I just didn't record it. And it's just I'm going to take that to the grave with me, but we can always go back and do it, I guess.
That's a hard one, Keter. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the hard part too. It's like you start at the hardest possible thing to articulate.
Right.
The top 3 are just. And that's also why some of the times we see people mapping things onto the Sefirot, they map things onto like Bina and Keter, and I'm like, I think that they're not even thinkable, much less.
I mean, but the Kabbalists are doing it all the time. We've been mapping them right here.
Sure.
Yanuka has been doing that plenty. I mean,
Well, I think more the lower 7, right? I think they're much more comfortable mapping things onto the lower 7. The top 3, I think that they want to be a little more hands-off-ish for metaphysical reasons. But
interesting. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot going on in each of them. I mean, in Keter, there's Galgaltin, Chachmas Tumar, Adla, Atik, Arich, Pnimis HaKeser, Chetinis HaKeser. It's like a whole parsha, as they say, a whole story for itself.
Oh, true. It's a whole world within worlds. But
yeah.
All right, the order of the day. Let's get to the Zohar. Otherwise, we can go on and on about things.
I don't think we've schmoozed this long before the text in any of the previous.
Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe it's we're too frightened to jump into it, but.
Or we're scared to let go of the text. We're near the end. We want to hold on to her.
Take our time. Yeah, like you stretch Shabbat out as long as possible.
Yeah.
Maybe stretching it out a little bit, but the text beckons. So
yes, she does.
Okay, I'll open. Rav Elazar opened saying, "Bless Yod Kei Vav Kei, O his angels, mighty in strength, fulfilling his word, heeding the sound of his word." This is from Psalms, Tehillim 103:20. King David issued an invitation to bless the Blessed Holy One, inviting the powers of heaven, the stars, the constellation, and other forces, and joining his own soul with them to bless the Blessed Holy One, as it's written, bless Yod-Keh-Vav-Keh, all his forces, his servants performing his will, bless Yod-Keh-Vav-Keh, O all his works and all his places and his dominion. Bless, O my soul, Yod-Keh-Vav-Keh, from the same psalm. He concludes all the blessings by mentioning his soul. So, so we return to the language of invitation, right? The idea that that we can be, that some blessings require a kind of invitation, and it's interesting that we have the idea that David is inviting like the entirety of the celestial world, the stars, the constellations, to also bless Yud-Keh-Vav-Keh, and also for his soul to bless God as somehow distinct from him. Right, bless. And this is a pretty common theme in the Baruch Hu Nafshi, right? Bless, oh my soul. And so the idea of that there's an invitation that he's opening for all the things in the world to bless, which also has the idea that they couldn't, or they wouldn't, or weren't. That somehow the universe wasn't doing this, and David invited them to. And then that they did, including his own soul, which I can believe that David's soul wasn't always worshiping God. He was up to shenanigans a good bit of the time. I imagine he wasn't exactly blessing God when he was sending Uriah off to get massacred. But yeah, again, I think we have the idea of that all of the cosmos at some level is being invited for this blessing.
It's a beautiful image, this idea of him inviting the heavens, the stars, the constellations, and we know from rabbinic literature and earlier that all of these things are in an act of praise, right? That the turning of the spheres. There's a very beautiful text, which is the Shira, the song. What's the original source of it? Which includes all of the song of every aspect in the universe. This is the song of the bird. This is the song of the rainbow. This is the song of the waterfall, and it goes through a beautiful medrash which does that. And it's certainly true that they. It's an interesting question: is it the invitation of David which causes them to praise, or is David inviting himself, his own consciousness, into that ongoing song of reality? There's this beautiful teaching from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, one of the early Hasidic masters, that when you go to pray in the field, you're inviting the trees and the grass and the birds to pray with you. You could say that we're inviting ourselves into the prayer which they're undertaking. They're in this existential state of prayer, right? In some sense,
right?
And I mean, it's funny as well. I wasn't thinking about this, but David, it's attributed to David that he says that that David wakes up before the sunrise, right? And he's the one which calls the sun up, right? Which is like the most mechanical thing, the sun rising every day. But David preceding the sun rising is him beckoning the sun to rise, and the sun rising is an act of worship as well. So it's this interesting dance where it's both happening without us, but also if we can be in that process, we're inviting our own soul into it and inviting that relationship.
Right. And I like the idea that it's already happening and we're inviting our soul into it. Like we have to rouse ourselves. There's a sense of like it's already happening all around us. We don't know it, but we have to rouse ourselves into that praise. It's also kind of a little bit of sideways sort of polemic there also, that anyone who would that would worship the stars, right? We talk about avodat kochavim, like sort of star worship, or worshiping objects in the sky, or even astrology. The idea that these objects are controlling us. The idea is that no, they also worship God. That these entities are not worthy of worship because they worship.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so the idea that no, it's a one way up. And he concludes all the blessings by mentioning his soul. The idea is that you get the sense that there's sort of the great chain of being, right? That at the very height, right, the angels are praising God, and then below them are the sort of intelligence, and the heavenly intelligences, and then all the other things, and you go all the way down to the individual, Baruch Hu Nafshi, my soul. And that you're sort of the lowest part of the rung all the way down from the supernal world to here, but you're also part of the great chorus of it's not the great chain of being, it's the great chorus of being.
Right. That's a nice way of putting it. The great chorus of being. Yeah, and this is a motif, the angelic chorus. It's the motif when who is it, Jacob, who wrestles with the man, the angel, and the angel has to return to praise God for for the sunrise. This is a very rich biblical rabbinic motif, which then gets taken up in Christianity and Islam. This interesting, the addition of his, there's obviously an emphasis on his soul. Baruch nafshi es Hashem, bless my soul, O God. And it's this Psalm 103 and this section, which is discussed in rabbinic literature and the Talmud and other places, of who's blessing who, because the English, the translation makes it very flat, and there's only one reading. But the Hebrew is open; it's ambiguous. Is it God blessing the soul? Is it the soul blessing God? And the Talmud seems to be saying that they're being equivocated intentionally. That there is this sort of this commingling or identity between the soul and God in some sense, and the Kabbalists, of course, are leading into that because they want to see, as much as they see distance between the soul and God, they also want to see parallel and mirroring between the two.
Right. Yeah. Why not both?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. If it can be read both ways, why not? Yeah, why not both? So that seems to be, but I like that reading. Well, I'll continue if you want.
Go for it.
So he invited the angels on high to bless him. This is God. And as it's written, bless Yoke Vovke, O his angels mighty in strength. Fulfilling, say, that they're doing something, fulfilling his word. Before Israel appeared, the angels on high performed and completed the work. So before Israel showed up, the angels alone did the holy work of praising God. As soon as Israel came and stood at Mount Sinai and said famously, right, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. I don't like the translation of heed as much. I like the hear a little better. But we will do and we will heed. They took over asiyah, doing, from the ministering angels and were included in his word. From then on, asiyah, or doing, on earth was among Israel alone, while the angels acted alone, with Israel completing and consummating asiyah. So first, mighty in strength, say, fulfilling his word, and then heeding. Happy are Israel who have taken over asiyah from them, and through whom it is fulfilled. So there's the famous scene at Mount Sinai where the Israelites famously, right, say, we will do and we will hear. Right. And this is considered to be the ultimate act of faith, because rather than even hearing what they have to do, they simply accede to doing it, and then they hear it later. And so the idea is that because of this Titanic Act of Faith, that has granted them access to doing what was at that point previously only uniquely in the purview of the angelic beings, and that is the work of blessing God and praising God in the fulfillment of God's word. And the idea is that that the oseh, the doing of the angels, is linked to the doing of the Israelites, and it was only, but that doing was unlocked because of they agreed to do first without reference to having to hear what they had to do. And so this it's a uniquely, I wouldn't say uniquely, but it's the Zohar really likes faith, right? In a way that you don't see emunah as, in fact, you can ask most Jews what the word for faith is in Hebrew, and they might not know. Emunah is not a big, you would think of it being a big deal because it's such a big deal in Islam and Christianity. It's not that big of a deal in a lot of ways in Judaism. But the Zohar really likes faith a lot. It's really about the emunah life. And this is a case where I think that it's really pushing that faith. And it is that faith that links the angelic doing and the Israelite doing. It welcomes them into the fold of that particularly sacred doing.
Yeah, there's also a lot of interesting relationship to the rabbinic commentary on the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai that's going on here. This whole episode of Nasev and Ishma, of we will do, and only then we'll sign the contract and we'll start doing, and only then will we come to listen and understand, perhaps. This whole idea of like taking over the angelic position. So there's a very famous is maybe an exaggeration. There's a somewhat well-known midrash that there's a dispute between the angels and humanity as represented by Moses as to who's the rightful inheritor or or actuator of the Torah. And the angels, they say the Torah is for us because we're the closest inheritors to the divine. We should be receiving it. We're the next step in the great course of being, as Justin, as you put it. And Moses has this very famous midrashic battle, this court case with the angels, and wins it over for humanity via the people of Israel, via Moses. So this whole thing, and then there's this talk about how when they say na'aseh, when they say we will do, they all receive a crown. The angels come and the crown is taken from the angels and given to the people of Israel, and then na'aseh they receive a second. Sorry, na'aseh one crown, nishma a second crown. And the idea of being crowned is later picked up by the Zohar as an act of a signifier of deification, and the carnation is a a strong mystic theme for the Kabbalists. And I think a lot of that is being said here without being said. Like we're expected to have all of these midrashim like being popped off like in our minds like a kind of fireworks. And I think also that when they take over Asiya, I think there's another Kabbalistic. The Kabbalists divide the world into 4 strata of reality. There's Atzilot, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. Asiya being the final world, the world of action. So when they take over Asiya, it means they're taking over action, but they're also taking dominion for the realm of the lowest of the 4 realms of reality in which we live. I think that's also what the Yanuka is saying here.
Which is weird because and that's the thing that struck me too, is that typically the Kabbalists divide the world, the cosmos, the olam into 4, but here we'll see it divided into 3.
Correct.
Which is sort of a jarring move.
Correct.
Because as soon as I hear the word Asiya, I'm like, oh yeah, the 4 worlds. Like, but then in a minute we'll see that the Yanuka is gonna be a little unusual in that regard.
Yeah, and it could be like that. These associations are like setting us up for assumptions which they're going to get pulled away, and that could be part of the play here. That we think we know what they're about to be doing when they're bringing up Asiya in this context, and then it's like, oh no, like you thought too soon. And I think that probably happened to both of us as we were reading this text, right?
Yeah, it was jarring. I was like, hold on, like
Yeah.
You hit a speed bump, and you're like, hold on, that's not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
And it's also just the case that it could be that the 4 worlds, right? That's I think that is dated primarily to the Zohar, and it could be the case that they're still sorting it out.
Right.
That the Zohar circle is still not settled on exactly how many worlds there are. I mean, in many ways, the Zohar has only just recently inherited the idea that there are definitively 10 Sfirot. The Iyun circle had more. So yeah, it could just be the case that they're still building the ship at sea. And
right. I mean, going back to what we were saying earlier, I feel like, Justin, you'd be a lot better at telling me when I'm being anachronistic here and misstating things. But there's another thing here which Matt points out, which is this idea of included in his word, which, I mean, in a Western world carries a lot of weight. The idea of the word logos. What does it mean to be included in the word of God? An idea which also has place in rabbinic literature, which may be in relationship to the Greek concept. But Matt points out here that as we've been saying, that Shekhinah, the divine feminine, is related to speech, and we'll see that she'll show up here again, no surprise. And word, Matt says, is a sort of a veiled reference to Shekhinah, to Malchut, speech. That they're being included in the divine indwelling, and which makes sense in the narrative of the Bible, because what follows from Sinai is when God tells the people to build the tabernacle so that I may dwell amongst you, v'shachanti b'tocham, which is the first place where we see the real manifestation of this divine, or what will be later read as the divine feminine, following this act. So for the Zohar here, the Jews or the Israelites put themselves into that relationship with God as Shekhinah, as the divine feminine counterpart, at the marriage at Sinai, at the Heros Gamos, which takes place, in the darkness and the thunder, and that's being done with this act of Na'aseh v'Nishma, of taking on the commandments and the Torah upon themselves.
Right. Yeah, and that's really the key moment, that that moment of and again, we'll talk about the sort of like this incredible power of love in just a little bit. This love that overwhelms you, and that's the kind of. I mean, I kind of think of that's the kind of thing that one does from love, right? That you often will agree to things that you haven't thought through.
Right.
You don't know the conditions yet.
Right.
Love has that kind of propulsive power. It's it's a kind of fanaticism, and that I think that's what the Zohar is really. We're going to have a lot of discussion about love in a minute, and I think this is sort of setting it up. It's not just faith, but also a kind of
right.
it's motivated by a deep love. And again, the language of with Israel completing and consummating, that consummation language is again getting us back into. It's like we tend to think of the relationship, at least from a historical point of view, the relationship between Israel and God as a kind of vassal contract, and that's often the way that gets taught, sort of in academic circles.
Right.
But of course, that's not at all how the Kabbalists think about it. They think of it much more like a ketubah, that it's a marriage contract, and those are very different kinds of one motivated by kind of an exchange. You give us protection, and we'll give you worship and sacrifices, as opposed to a marriage in which you're so completely in love with each other, you're not quite sure you're not even quite sure what you're getting yourself in for.
Right. Yeah, I mean the reading of it as a marriage contract is a very old motif, and it goes back at least as far as the rabbis, if not even into the Bible itself. The biblical prophets that are looking back at this moment in Sinai and reading it as a moment of love, and there's some really beautiful expressions of that. I mean, the rabbis read all of the great book of erotic poetry, the Song of Songs, as a description of the Israelites leaving Egypt and coming to consummate with God on the mountain. There's one particularly fresh and direct putting of it in the Talmud where these two sages, and one of them is marrying the daughter of the other, a younger colleague, and he makes a condition that he'll, like, mirroring that of Jacob, that he'll study for 14 years before he takes his daughter's hand in marriage. And he agrees to the father-in-law's condition, and then he comes back a year later. He says, "I can't do it. Let's make it just 7, and I'll do the 7 later. I'll do like paying installments." And then like a few months later, he's like, "I can't do it. Let me marry her now, and I'll do the 14 later." And the father-in-law, the great sage, says, "You remind me of God when he took the Israelites out of Egypt. He thought that he's going to wait until they get to Israel, until they have the temple, and they'll build a home together, and it'll be beautiful." And then God said, I can't wait anymore. I need to have them here in the desert." And he makes the tabernacle. He makes this, and he marries them on the spot at Sinai. He has the ketubah, and the sense that there's this really deep, intense love that God has for the people. The way that the woman is described in the Song of Songs, that's Mizot Olam in Hamidbar. Who is this who rises up out of the desert, and describes her body and her beauty and the smoke coming off her. Ketimrat Ashan Mekoteret Mor, like the fragrance which is billowing off her, and God just has to. It's like, it's really not. Yeah, it's much more. It's very intensely romantic, and it's very intensely a love relationship, and it's not a rational relationship, and that's reflected here in the Jews saying, the Jews also being in love and saying, like, "Not 7 Ishma, we're in for this. Like, we'll read the fine print later." Right, which perhaps should have.
Yeah. So, and it wasn't that fine print, actually.
630 mitzvah. They did not know.
It was a hell of a contract in the end.
Gosh, again, it's beautiful. We still love it.
Yeah. So again, I think that the language here is, again, the erotic language, and of course the prophets, right, often describe Israel as, like, engaging in sexual infidelity with the nations, and that language certainly, by inverse, speaks to the idea that they certainly conceived of it as a much more as a love relationship or erotic relationship, as opposed to a vassal contract.
Yeah, and the desire for that relationship to be one which is filled with faith, faithfulness, and with love. Who was it? Hosea v'yarstichli la'olam v'yarstichli b'tzedek u'mishpat. That let me be betrothed to God for eternity. Let me be betrothed in kindness and justice, like that. The real, and that's what the messianic consummation is, which begins at Sinai and continues at Purim, which we're coming up to, and then only finally gets consummated at the end of times, where that love relationship is reconsummated. But this is the great story that the Zohar is fully reading the narrative as a love story, reading it from the exile of the Garden with Adam and Eve, all the way up to the messianic redemption, which it itself is trying to partake in. And that's the love story between the Holy Blessed One and Shekhinah, between us and God, and that's the story that we find ourselves in.
Right. Yeah, and not just a love story, but a very erotic one. I mean,
absolutely.
That's where the rabbis and the Zohar really, I think, part ways. That the rabbis are happy to talk around the topic, but the Zohar is like, nope, we're going to talk about it, like, pretty on the nose when it comes to the sex stuff.
Yeah,
they'll hide some things, right? But even the hiding is still showing.
Yeah.
Like when you tell me, oh, that's a concealed matter. You're like, well, they're talking about penises. Like they're like, it's just like, it's like, yeah. When you don't tell me, you told me.
Yeah.
So it's much more on the nose than the eroticism, which is just
Do you think
lovely
it's
as well.
more on the nose than the Song of Songs? Because the Song of Songs is pretty on the nose as well.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
pretty
So,
rated, I would say.
I would, but that's to the rabbis, right? Not to the Bible. The Bible is much more comfortable with sex stuff.
Right, right, right.
The rabbis are uncomfortable, and I think that's part of there's always a debate about what to do with Song of Songs, like who can read
Yeah,
it, can it be translated into the vernacular?
yeah,
It was always the object of some degree of censorship in terms
sure.
of, and so, but I think that made the rabbis uncomfortable, and even Maimonides says things like, yeah, the Hebrew language, you can tell it's perfect because it has no words for like sexual stuff. That's one of his arguments for
Yeah, yeah,
um, um, for all that. But yeah, I think that the Bible is pretty comfortable with sex and sexuality. The
yeah.
rabbis are a little less. The Zohar is much more.
I think there's also a sense which the rabbis are trying to put forward, which is they see the intense power and beauty of sexuality, and they understand that it's precisely beautiful and erotic when it's kept concealed, and the second it's just put out into the marketplace, it's no longer erotic. It's just pornographic, essentially.
Right.
And I think they're aware of that, the need for the discreetness and the tease to keep that alive, and that's very much part of the rabbinic desire and part of the way that a Jewish marriage is built. And you can read that as being prudes, or you can read that as being in touch with the rhythm and rhyme of sexuality itself, and how it needs to be concealed and played with to be kept alive.
Right. It has to be safeguarded. And again,
Correct.
to think of the Zohar as popularizing anything is to really misunderstand just how esoteric this text is.
Right.
When this was published and was written, you're talking about a pretty lonely club of people. And that's still, even to this day, a pretty small clique of people in the world. Or to describe this text as public is pushing it.
Yeah.
Um,
This what we're doing here may be one of the more public engagements with the Zohar.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how many people today will have a Zohar Chavrusa, and I bet you can count that on a hand probably.
a hand missing some fingers.
Yeah, that would be my guess. That'd be my guess. I'll keep going.
Go for it.
So the child said, "Guard yourself and succeed with your weapons. Has Israel gained only this praise and no other?" So we continue with the war metaphor here with the Yanuka, but now the Yanuka is girding on Rabbi Eliezer. When he says, he replied, "This praise I have discovered and no other." So that's the praise that Israel gets, is they get to do the Asiyah of the angels. The Yanuka is not going to have it. It's not enough. So the Yanuka says, "The blade of your sword fails, or you don't wield it as a warrior should." Again, the blade language again is, I think, kind of, I think there's some phallic stuff going on with that. The Yanuka uses a slingshot, and the other guys use swords. They're grown men. He's a child, and yet they wield their sword. They impotently wield their swords.
The failing sword.
The failing sword. That'd be a great great euphemism. Or not a euphemism, but a great metaphor. So
I love the guard yourself. Like in modern parlance, we would just say "watch yourself." Like he's warning them.
Yeah, they should have put it on guard. I think it, like, actually using the language of fencing
on guard,
or something.
Right,
on guard would have been a good translation, maybe. Get ready. So the child says, "What is the highest praise which was not entrusted to the angels on high alone, but only to Israel?" Right. So we have two praises, one for the angels, one for Israel. But if a praise is given only to Israel, then that's a significant one, and this must be an additional one. And what is that one? Of course, it's Kedusha. This is a topsy-turvy moment, because we typically think of the Kedusha as exactly the one that the angels do, right? In fact, I think it's Isaiah, that's the thing we learn about the seraphim, is that they say this prayer all the time, all 24/7.
What is Kedusha, Justin? You want to translate for us?
So it's the praise where they say, the seraphim are around the throne of God, and they say, "Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh, Adonai Tzavot, Mel Kadosh." Like, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the King of the hosts, Lord of the hosts. The world is full of your glory.
Right.
And so they circle around the throne of God singing this continuously. And so it's uniquely associated with the angels, but the Yanuka is flipping it and saying, actually, no. Right? We know the angels say it. Right, and traditionally also when we say it, in the prayer service, right? You put your legs together,
Correct.
right? Because the angels only have one leg, right? And the idea
Right.
is you're like the angels. And in
Right.
fact, the custom is to go up on your tippy toes every time you say kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. The idea is you are basically emulating the angels. But in this case, the Yanuka is going to reveal something. In fact, it's the opposite, right? Blessing was entrusted to them alone as it was entrusted to Israel, but holy was not entrusted to them alone, only together with Israel, for they performed Kedusha only along with Israel. Now, you might say, right, look at what's written. One calls to another saying, holy, 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 right? But when Israel sanctifies below, and as long as Israel doesn't sanctify below, they do not utter Kedusha. That is chutzpahdik of we think of it as the angels are the
Mm,
ones who
mm.
uniquely have this because of their extreme proximity to the throne of God. They're constantly in this state of exaltation, but in fact the Unica says no, it's only when Israel does it that they do it, right? So
Yeah.
there's something really, we think of ourselves as emulating the angels, but no, when we do it, it empowers them to do it, or it causes them to do it, or allows them to do it, or um, excites them to do it. I think the erotic language is also important
Mm,
here, right?
mm,
But there's always I get them like the moment when we go up on our tippy toes, it's like point, and it's like reminding them, hey,
mm,
like it's kedusha time.
mm.
So this again, it's like the real interesting topsy turvy stuff when it comes to the Zohar. That what you think is the unique purview of the angels, in fact, no, they're only doing it as an effect of Israel engaging in the kedusha. So again, the connection between the lower worlds and the upper worlds, right? That the upper world can stimulate the lower worlds, and the lower worlds can stimulate the upper worlds, and it's all one again one chorus of praise. But an interesting read on the power of prayer to motivate the seraphim to pray themselves.
Yeah, it brings of me of almost like a very Hasidic text and idea here, and of course, the Hasidic authors and masters are building on the Zohar, amongst other texts. This the sense of the exaltation of the human, and more specifically here of the Jew, and the centrality of that, and even placing the human above the angelic is something which is going to very, very strongly influence the Hasidic mind centuries later. Um, and there's also a sense, and I know Justin, you're not wanting to see this here strongly, but there's a sense where this causal relationship between the two of them at some point also begins to blur the boundaries between the two of them.
Mhm.
So the Hasidic masters would say that instead of reading this causally, see it as like when the human down here does it, it is the angels above doing it. There is like it's more collapsed into one activity itself, and that's reading the strata of reality as more pancaked into each other as opposed to really ontologically separate. And whether that's right to read back into the Zohar, or we can only read that forward from the Zohar, is a good question. But it's so, however we're going to choose to read that in on that question of it, it's certainly an incredibly empowering text for the human. It's not a lonely, wretched, putrid, fallen human here. It's a human from whom the power for the seraphim, these terrifyingly awesome angels, that they can only utter their praise to God when Israel below sanctifies. And I read this text Shabbat morning in Shul, and when we came to the part of the prayer where we say Kadosh, 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 it really hit me quite hard that where for the mind of the Kabbalists, we're really affecting something cosmic here in our activity. It's not just a bunch of people who rolled out of bed and have 100 other things in their head and are trying to get through the davening. You're actually doing something really, really tremendous, really cosmic, and this is there's a sense where if you enter into the sort of state of mind of the Zohar, you can really imbue otherwise very mundane passing activities with a really intense sense of presence and consciousness and cosmicness.
Yeah, there's a real sense of theurgy here, right? That if you take my more causal read of it, that you're really prompting the most powerful beings in the cosmos, second to God, or Metatron, to engage in what is ultimately the most holy act of praise that and of the greatest proximity to the actual throne of God.
Mm.
And like, it's also there's the one side of it, right, that is like, oh wow, look how amazing this power is to have this prayer. But there's also the warning that if you don't do it,
Mm.
then the angels can't do
Mm.
either. And there's something about we know that the Zohar, one of the things it's concerned about is sort of the lax religiosity of Spanish Jews at the time. And they really dislike that. Maimonideans were like, if everything's just a metaphor, then you can kind of metaphor yourself out of doing the mitzvahs. And the Zohar's like, absolutely not. That is not going to fly. It wouldn't have flown for Maimonides either. But there's an idea that imagine that an empty throne of God, that
Mm.
the beings are circling silently and they're just
Mm.
waiting, like
Mm.
looking at their watch, being like, where are these people?
Yeah.
And so it's also not just the amazing theurgy of of causing them to say the kedusha, but it's also the deafening silence if
Mm.
it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So it's both an empowering idea of what you're doing, a really radical theurgy of prayer, but also a pretty stark responsibility that you're propping up the silence if you don't.
Right. There's that double threat there. I mean, or the empowerment or the threat. I feel a bit bad now for praying at a Shabbos minyan that only gets their act together and only begins praying at about 11 in the morning, because these angels they're sure waiting around for a while. They're like, these Chabadniks, we're gonna be on shift until they.
Yeah,
My apologies.
it really gives a different weightiness to this. And again, it's more of the idea that to go back to your point, that the Zohar is not up and down. Everything's connected.
Yeah.
Whether it's ontologically connected or causally connected or both or psychologically connected.
Yeah.
In the Zohar, you're responsible not just for this world, but you're responsible for the whole world, and not the whole world as the olamim, like everything, all the way up to the very proximity to the throne of God.
Yeah.
So I'll finish this one, and then maybe you can jump on. But do you have something?
No, I think I wonder for myself, and maybe this is a broader subject and less pertinent to this exactly, of like how much language do the Zohar authors have at their hands to differentiate between the causal, the interconnected, the psychological, the cosmic, and how much, because you see those read a bit more carefully or distinguish a bit more later, and how much is it the purposey of their language, how much is it that they're writing knowing that they're going to be read by people who are going to burn them if they speak too much. There's a lot going on here with their choice of language, I think.
Yeah. And I think, they had the language. At least in Hebrew, they had it already, right? So that, that Maimonides was translated by Ibn Tibon and those guys. And they had the technical language for those distinctions, I think, is there. And sometimes they do use it. But I think that they're much more trying to, they're self-consciously not trying to do philosophy. Like, I think they're trying to do something, like we know Moshe de Leon read Maimonides.
Right.
So if they wanted to, they could do that.
Right.
And it's not because they lack the ability.
Right.
It's because they're trying to accomplish something very different.
Yeah.
They're painting with a very different,
Yeah.
a very, very different palette. And I think self-consciously over and against trying to fit themselves into some kind of, Maimonidean distinctions. I think that they're painting with a much more archaic palette on purpose.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. A point which Gershon Shalom makes over and again, that they write philosophy, at other times, and they're certainly capable of it, and many of them are accomplished philosophers for what that means in their day. But they're trying to do medrash, they're trying to do narrative, and the staying power of narrative turns out is much more than that of philosophy. And that's true. That's true for Plato and Nietzsche as much as it is for the Zohar.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think that they're just up to something else, and yeah, I totally agree. That's not because they can't. It's because they're operating in myth language and myth power, and myth power, myth language are completely different tools than the analytic power of drawing distinctions between the kind of distinctions we would see in Maimonides.
Right. Correct.
Both are important. Trust me. Sure. I spent a lot of time with Maimonides. I spent a lot of time with this. For Kedusha ascends from three worlds. This is the part we were saying that was kind of a, I don't know. You ever like have that moment where like there's a clear piece of glass and it's like a door and you just like walk into it and not realize it's there.
Yeah.
That was the intellectual moment for me. I was like, punk, like three worlds. So
it hit me just the same.
Yeah, it's just like, it's one of those like, are you awake moments? Because all the Asiya talk has set us up for the four worlds, and now So
I feel like we were set up for this full here. Like it was, I feel like we were a bit played with.
But there's a logic to it. So for Kedusha ascends from three worlds, not from two. So again, we've been talking about sort of above and below, but Yanuka's like, right? Not four and not two, right? You Kabbalists, you talk about four. You normies talk about the above and below, right? This corresponds, right? And what he does, he says, one called, right? One of the seraphim calls to another, saying. So each linguistic unit is corresponding to a new world. One called to another, saying, right? And these are the three worlds, and correspondingly, three sanctifications. That's why we say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So it is Israel's praise that they take up Kedusha from below. And Matt has a pretty helpful note here, right? Is that in this moment, at least, it seems like the Kabbalists are dividing the world between the world of the human, the world of the angelic, and the world of God's throne. And that is a distinct way of dividing up the world. Now, one of the things I thought about this was, it's not like dividing the world into three in this way demolishes dividing the world into five, the way that is more traditionally done, or into four, the way that is more traditionally done in Kabbalah.
Sometimes five.
And sometimes five, right?
Yeah.
And the soul too, right? Sometimes it comes in depending on
Correct.
What it's just doing is saying, if you want to look at the world qua the relationships of humans, angels, and God, that's three, right? And so it's not saying, right, and this is sort of a Husserlian point. It's about sort of the phenomenology of worlds, and that in this way there are three, right? But that doesn't get rid of the others. It's just it's a point about like how we modalize, or how we instantiate worlds. And this is a case where for whatever reason the Yanuka is trying to modalize them into three. And it has to do with the relationship between us, the angels, and God.
100%. It's not a question of is there actually three or is there actually four. It's a question of which framework are we employing for purposes of conversation, and it's all very relative and it's all very contextual. 100%. It's also somewhat arbitrary. Like he's getting three out of the fact that there's Vikara Zeh El Zevi Amar. Right, it's like he's breaking up the Hebrew sentence into three, but like it's such an arbitrary breakage. You could say, like the first one called, you could say Vikara, Zeh, Els. Like there's so many ways to count that verse, and then Va'amar, like you're counting a third there. Like it seems like he's number three before he gets to the verse, and then he's just finding a way to count it as three.
Right, but there's a logic, right? Because there is us stimulating the angels, and then they praise God. And there's certainly three distinct metaphysical registers, right? Like we're not angels, angels aren't God, and God isn't any of the three. And therefore, in that way, it makes some sense to talk about three registers. But again, it's just like this is just the modality he's choosing to operate in at this moment. This is also why I really, stress to folks maybe who are watching, when you hear things like, well, in the Kabbalah there are four worlds, done, and you need to, right? And you've been, and I tell people, like, if you study the Zohar, sometimes there are four, sometimes there are three, sometimes there are 10. Like it really, really matters that we, for me at least, that teaching Zohar and teaching Kabbalah, even academically, is really you have to get rid of these like fossilized ideas about what the Kabbalah is, period. Because it has so much to do with the dynamism of the text under analysis, of the metaphysical point they're making, of the what they're trying to do and how they're moving and shaking in that moment, in that pericope, that that this is that those things are going to matter, and that matters much more than just sort of fossilizing out, oh, there are four worlds.
Yeah. It's also not a question of getting rid of the fact that there are four worlds. It's a question of being careful with how we present that and saying instead something like, often when the Kabbalists will be dividing the cosmos into different strata, they'll use four. That's like
Right.
a thing which they'll often do, and that would be a true way of phrasing it. And it's important to have those. We can't throw away all of the. But if they're taken too hard and fast, then they won't be helpful. But it's also interesting what he's doing here with this verse, and I just noticed this now, that the verse one called to another saying, we usually read that horizontally. So one angelic camp called to the other angelic camp, and they said, so it's the Seraphim calling to the Chayot or different, within them. But what he's doing here is he's saying one called to the other. He's doing that horizontally.
Right.
So it's the human calls to the angelic, and the angelic then says, and so it's a very fun pun that he's doing there, which is not the standard of reading at all, and he's flipping the axis of that calling.
Right. And I guess when I think about the upper world, like, what do you imagine it as the seraphim calling to the chayot, or the seraphim calling to one another in the more traditional? Because the chayot are there in that verse, right?
So there is, so in the way that the prayer is read in Jewish liturgy and by the rabbis, it's the Seraphim ve'ofane hachayot hakodesh. It's the Seraphim and the holy angel beings. The karazel zemer. They're calling back and forth to each other, at least in the brachot that lead up to Shema.
Right.
That's how it's phrased. And then there's kind of the sense that there's many different camps, and they're in this chorus of one calling back to the other. So that's how and that could also just be from how it's being liturgized.
Right. Yeah, well, because I've always wondered sort of like who's calling to whom in that exchange. But again, like Yanuka parses it very differently.
Yeah, it's us calling to them. And yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's again the topsy-turvy vertigo of what you thought was the top was actually not. You misplaced where you misplaced the motor of this whole prayer.
Right. And just to keep everyone's attention here, this is all building on how we started with how Rabbi Eliezer opened, that David includes his soul in his calling out with the angels and the cosmos and the constellations. And this is a continuation of that theme, and I'm unpacking what that might mean, and what is the role of the human soul in this cosmic prayer, essentially.
Right. Apparently not apparently hugely important. It's
not too shabby.
Not too shabby. No, you're right. All right, do you want to pick up?
Sure. So we're on page 286 in the Pritzker edition. Rabbi Elazar said, "So it is, and we have established these matters. We have furthermore established that 3 sanctifications were entrusted to Israel below. From this verse, you shall hallow yourself and become holy, for I, God, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, am holy." And then he reads that thrice, you shall hallow yourselves, 1, and become holy, 2, for I, God, am holy, 3. Here sanctification was entrusted to them. So Rabbi Eliezer, who previously was bested by the Yanuka, who couldn't think of what other things were entrusted to Israel, here concurs with the Yanuka that indeed sanctification was entrusted to the people of Israel, and it's only through them that the angels can sanctify. And he brings his own mishmash of verses from Leviticus to read this thrice holiness, and that sanctity is through the people of Israel. You should make yourselves holy and become holy, for I, God, am holy. And there's 3 going on there. Viskadashtem, visum kadeshim ki kadesh ani. Which is interesting, reading this from where we are in history now, because there's a famous Hasidic reading which takes this Zohar reading even further, which is to say that So the verses juxtapose the holiness, the sanctity of God, and the sanctity of the people of Israel, right? As we read here in these verses here, that sanctify yourself because I am holy, right? Kadoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani, says the verse in the Hebrew elsewhere as well. And there's a classic rabbinic reading, which is to say that why are these two juxtaposed, the sanctity of Israel and the sanctity of God? And the rabbinic answer is to know that you can be holy, but don't think that your holiness can be the same sanctity as God. You're holy, okay, fine, but I'm God, I'm really holy, is kind of the early rabbinic reading. And the Hasidic reading, through the lens of the Zohar, flips that on its head and says, Kadoshim tiyu, right? And if you think that your holiness can be greater than God's, know that God is holy. And the Hasidic reading is that know that God's holiness above is from your holiness, and it's the holiness of the people of Israel who create God's holiness, which is a very heretical reading.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't see this yet quite fully. Here we're just doing it between the angels and the people of Israel, but Elazar's pushes it further to God, and a few hundred years later that will be made more explicit in the Hasidic text. This Kadoshim, I'm trying to remember if I can remember the Hebrew phrase there, if it helps at all. Anyhow,
right. I think it's like you said, it's several verses cobbled together.
Right.
He's kind of making an anthology here more than
Yeah.
quoting a single verse. It's always that line has always struck me as interesting, is like, you shall hallow yourselves.
Right.
Like, because again, we think about the idea of holiness and in Israelite theology, it's about separation.
Right.
That something becomes holy because it gets marked off as distinct in a way that it's only usable for certain kinds of things,
Mhm.
or it's somehow separate from the idea. And it's always struck me as a particularly strange idea of becoming holy oneself. Like, how can one separate oneself off? And what are the valences by which that means? Obviously you can you can become ritually pure,
Right.
and able to accomplish certain kinds of things, but that's still not holiness. Like it's an interesting kind of thing that like in these verses, God doesn't do it to you, right? But you do it to yourself. And that's it's always struck me as one of the commandments that was always odd to me. Like, I can understand how I could like sanctify an object to be used in the temple, right? I could set it apart and it can only be used in a certain kind of way. But how could I do that to myself?
Right.
And maybe by taking, like the Levites do, or the Nazarites do, taking certain vows and things like that. But it is a particularly strange commandment. It struck me as a strange commandment. I don't know.
Which makes it all the more strange, the then Kabbalistic turned Hasidic reading, that it's not only that we sanctify ourselves, but we sanctify God as well. The rabbinic text came back to mind so the rabbinic question is Yachal Kamoni, you may think that your holiness can be like God, and therefore the verse says, no, God is holy, my holiness is higher than yours. And the very heretical Hasidic reading is Yachal Kamoni, and they remove the question mark, they say exclamation mark, you can be as holy as God, because God's holiness, my holiness, is not above your holiness, but is above because of your holiness.
Right.
So this is not only do we sanctify ourselves somehow and separate ourselves somehow, but that separation brings holiness to God, which is a very, very bizarre, but also a very Kabbalistic theme.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not really being spelt out fully here, and we'll see other places where it's more explicit. When the Zohar speaks about the verse of V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, that God rests or leans upon Jacob, and juxtaposes that with Pharaoh leaning upon his God. We'll see that more explicitly, but I think we are pointing fingers at that heretical idea.
Right.
He said to him, I have done well. So this is the Yanuka responding back to Rebbe Lazar. I have done well because you didn't remember the lance, till I took it from behind your shoulder and put it in your hand. From here on, remember the lance that's in your hand. Now return to where you left off. So this is really great. This is one of the most backhanded compliments in all of Jewish literature, and there's lots of them, where he compliments him for doing good, and he says, you did good because I took the lance which was behind your back and I put it in your own hand. And now remember where your lance is. Don't I know you're a bit old, but don't remember where the sword is, right?
Right, and it's even the language of a lance, right? Because of all the weapons he could have picked, the lance is the most conspicuous. It's a
Mm,
giant pole.
true, true, true.
It's like, it'd be different if it were like, a little dagger, but he's,
Right.
it's like, no, like, of all the things that, I always think of like the bathroom keys in like an office are always stuck
Yeah.
to some giant tin can or something, and you can't lose
Right.
it. And like of all the weapons that he didn't see behind his own back, the lance is, conspicuously the largest weapon in the retinue of
Right.
so it's just something. It's not just. I think it's not just a backline comment. It's like really driving it home
Yeah.
with
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the choice of weapon he picked.
And then this line of remember that the lance is in your hand. It's like if you need to be told to remember that there's a
Yeah,
lance
of
in your
all the
hand.
things you can forget that's in your
Right,
hand, right?
right,
It's this giant,
right.
this giant
The
tilting
spear.
lance or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, spear or
that's
tilting
great.
lance even.
That's great.
Um, yeah. So yeah. Now return to where you left off. Like,
But Rabbi Lezer takes it in stride,
yeah, of
and he
course.
says to
Because
the words.
Rabbi Eliezer has like been goading him on the entire time. He's
Right, right.
unlike the first time where they were being laughed at, they've now come back and they're I think they're laughing with.
Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah,
that he's along for the ride.
yeah. It seems like they've become closer and simmer down to each other, but still not fully letting up. Rabbi Eliezer said, to the words we were engaged in concerning, and also there's something beautiful here. The child wants to continue to hear Rabbi Eliezer. He's not shutting him down. He's not trying to. He's giving him the mic. He's saying, please, like continue. I like, and that's a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
Rabbi Eliezer says, to the words we were engaged in concerning bracha, blessing. Oh, this is beautiful. We're about to say,
Yeah, this is great.
Baruch Hu, bless, from Psalm 103:20. What is meant by Baruch Hu? What is meant by bless? What does this Hebrew word mean? Let's open up the word. Draw blessings from the place where all blessings issue, until they form brecha, a pool. So he's connecting the Hebrew word bracha with brecha, blessing and pool. A pool through the abundant flow that is drawn. So we have this efflux, the divine flow which comes down, and if we draw enough of it, it can begin to not only be a trickle or a flow, it can actually pull. We can have a pool of flow that is the blessing. And from abundance of water in that pool, water here being a metaphor for the divine light or energy, the effulsion from God, the waters will immediately swarm with numerous fish of all kinds. So this harkens back to a bit of an older biological theory that if you had standing vegetation or standing water, you could have spontaneous generation of animal life, and animal life represents here the fullness of life and blessing. So when you have enough of this water here, automatically within that water will be sprouting fish of all kinds, fish which here would mean angels or souls, that which swims in the waters of God. A beautiful metaphor. What is that flow? God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, a stream of light shining from that resplendent speculum, drawing from above to below. So here the Zohar does its own, the namesake Zohar, the shining light, taps into that beautiful poetic imagery of the stream of light shining from the resplendent speculum, drawing from above to below. And this is really the whole story of bringing that light down, bringing bracha to draw down that light so that it's a pool of light from which things can begin to sprout and grow. And of course, the motif of the fish in the water. Fish has been the Yanuka is the son of the great fish. The fish in the water, the fish, the great water, the mother, the Shekhinah. This is all themes that are now beginning to emerge into this beautiful poetry and symphony that we've been constructing.
Yeah, the language of pools and water and fountains is the favorite language of the Zohar, and I love how it really builds. It goes from like a trickle to a pool to a great abundance of water, like an ocean, and that it just gives you an idea of the enormity of the shefa of the divine flow. Sometimes we have the phrase of like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. That's sort of I imagine that intensity is what's going on here. It's a huge amount of flow. Yeah, and just like again, that's the imagery of the Sefirot as like as a system of like rivers almost,
Mm,
with rivers and
mm,
eddies and
yeah,
currents, and
yes,
again, they think about rivers and eddies and currents. They can reverse flow and they can
yeah,
move in this direction
yeah,
because we've seen this like sort of reverse this regression in flow that we don't normally think of
yeah,
in the Sefirot, but we've seen it already in the Yanuka so far.
yeah,
But the idea of again, we think of a tree of life, and that's the dominant motif. But there's something even more powerfully um, living, Mayim Chaim, right?
Mm,
And thinking about this as a flow of
mm,
waters,
mm.
and that the sphirot are just sort of pools where they gather, but the whole system is kind of flowing around each other. The imagery of again of fountains and pools, I think, is much more to the point, because the, there's no way to not think of a river as moving. A
Yeah,
tree you can think of as stable, and even though it's still growing or whatever.
right.
But the idea of water flowing and it gathering in the again the great language of the Zohar, the resplendent speculum, the of Tiferet. I really love that imagery. Um, I think that thinking about the Sphirot as a system as a hydraulic system, I think
Mm,
is actually much better of an
mm.
analogy than as the tree
Yeah.
symbolism.
Yeah, I think when we say tree, we're trying to hint at something non-static. We're trying to hint
Mhm.
to the sap that's moving from, or the energy that's moving through the mycelium into the roots, into the trunk, and the sap that's then flowing. That the tree as a living organism with veins and arteries and with the energy being pumped around, and we don't see that looking from the outside. We only understand that from coming to know the tree,
Right.
which may be an apt metaphor, that we don't see the divine energies flowing through the cosmos, but when we know what's going on, we can understand how every leaf and every root is deeply interconnected and interdependent.
Right, and I guess it was also especially timely this time of the year. We just had Tu B'Shvat, right, where
Mm,
the sap in the trees began to move again
mm,
after the winter. So and I love that imagery of all around you there's movement where there wasn't, but you just still don't
mm,
see it.
yeah,
It's a lovely image from the Talmud.
yeah. This notion as well of the fish that are populating, that are spawning almost spontaneously in the abundance of water. There's also a beautiful idea, and Justin, you may know better than I do where this begins in as a Jewish literary device or motif. But in Hasidic texts, whenever there's a need to um, give example of like a random word, like philosophers will talk about like the chair as like their random example of a thing. So whenever there's a random word that's needed to talk about words, qua words, or like the numerology of words, the Hasidic texts almost entirely will choose one Hebrew word to demonstrate word, like blank X, and that's bracha. That's a word,
Mhm.
blessing. And I know that's certainly the case in Hasidic texts, which I grew in Chabad texts, which I grew up on. And I wonder how far that goes back to the Kabbalists. And it's such a beautiful idea that if we're going to pick any random word, we're not going to pick like dog or table or like something arbitrary. We want to pick a word which is filled itself with light and blessing and overflowing. And I don't mean to offend any dog lovers out there, but
Yeah, yeah, and again the imagery of of again associating like the an ocean with the heavens, right? Like
mm,
Shemaim, right? The waters there.
yeah,
That again that the fish come to represent angels. It's a great imagery because again it's like the fish we think of being the creatures in the greatest depths, right? So these are the creatures that live in the deepest parts of our physical reality, or the fish. And again, it flips it up where it says, yeah, and also they're the fish of the fish of the supernal worlds, or the angels, and
right,
again like the lowest and the highest,
right.
the how they're united in the image in the fish imagery, which is really really lovely.
Which is very appropriate as well. I mean, the whole idea of this, as you mentioned, the upper waters and the lower waters, right? That God in the beginning of Genesis separates between the upper and lower waters, and Shamayim, as you're saying, is there is water there, which I mean, if you from an ancient cosmological perspective, when it begins to rain, it's because that there's a source of water above, and that water comes down, and we have water which precipitates back. And by the time the Kabbalists are reading that, they're reading water as a metaphor, and they're reading those two oceans that are mirroring each other as this the entire mirrored metaphor that we've been reading here.
Mhm.
These two oceans, these two sources that are, the Jew blessing which the angels bless, and blesses us in return. So this is very much, and drawing down, of course, is always put back into, going back up into precipitating to the divine. There's also, this might be an obvious point for the Zohar, but the lower waters of the feminine. This is a sexual reference and sexual arousal, which includes the sexual fluids above and below. This is going to be a theme which is very much between the lines constantly when we're talking. And when we're talking about something sexual here, when we say bracha, to draw down the divine flow, the seed, the life, the energy, the masculine waters, the maim zuchen as they're referred to. So this is certainly all tied into that.
Right, definitely. And again, the sort of the ontological eroticism of arousal, of flow and movement. It's all over the Zohar.
This is yes, you.
No, please.
This is for the celestial angels living in the loftiest chamber. To them it is said, bless Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, bless God. We who dwell below say, Baruch et Hashem, bless et, which doesn't have a replacement in English. It's just a...
it's an accusative. It's a direct object marker. Yeah, it's a direct object marker. For
we need to draw upon this et. So this word, which can't be translated into English, but just this placeholder is going to be both in the rabbis and the Kabbalists will be opened up. We'll draw upon this et, through whom we may enter into the presence of the king to see his face. And who is that? Obviously, it is the Shekhinah. Et and et, because et is made up of two Hebrew letters. It's the Aleph and the Taf, the Alpha and the Omega, and the Aleph and the Taf. The alphabet represents speech, right? It's the letters of speech, and the letters of speech represents, as we've been saying, the feminine Malchut Shekhinah, through whom we may enter into the presence of the king to see his face. So David said, as for me, b'tzedek, in righteousness, I will behold your face. Va'ani b'tzedek echse panecha, Psalm 17:15. B'tzedek, by righteousness surely. And again, reading tzedek here as Shekhinah, that David says, I will not see your face directly, but I'll see it through Shekhinah, through the divine overflow, through now it's being what was referred to first or hinted at first with the word et, and now with the word tzedek. Therefore, the beginning of the prayer is bless et Hashem, bless through Shekhinah, God, to draw upon our heads this et, this Shekhinah. Once we draw this et upon us, we should utter prayer and offer praise. So although we've been elevating the human in their place in the cosmos to that which allows the angels to praise, we still have a bit of humility here as humans, and we say that by the angels it says, bless God. There's nothing separating the two. There's their blessing, and then there's God, because they're right next to the throne. We humans, we need to go through the chain, and we need to go through primarily Shekhinah, through Malchut, through the Sefirot, and that's represented either by saying, bless et Hashem, or through tzedek, I will see your face. And reading tzedek here, not literally as righteousness, but b'tzedek, through Shekhinah, I will see the face of God.
Right, and it's literally the beginning of prayer, right? I mean, it's easy to forget that prayer in a Jewish service, and I think we're speaking mostly of like Shabbat morning, but like all of the Psukkah de Zimra and all that stuff is just getting ready to pray. Prayer
Correct.
doesn't actually formally begin until the Baruch Hu, and it's right. That's the beginning of prayer. That line, right? Baruch Has Adonai, like that line opens up when the leader says that line, or when we say it, right? That is what starts the flow down upon us, where Shekhinah rests on us. And so it's again, it's not just this is both a kind of metaphysical thing, but also it's halacha. Like you need to have your ass in a shul. Like you need to be, you got to, and again, you can't do this without 10 people, right? Like that blessing cannot be uttered unless you're with a minyan. And so again, this is not just like this is one of those things where there's a huge metaphysical point to be made, but there's also just like you need to make it minions, because if you don't say this, then Shekhinah doesn't rest upon your head, and then we have a big technical problem. We'll see in just a minute that you become an idolater, basically.
Right.
Which again makes some sense, right? Because if Shekhinah is not the object of your prayer, then what is? Right? There must be some kind of idolatry.
Prayer.
Right. It must be some idol. It must be something else.
Yeah.
So again, there's just like for me, reading between the lines here, it's also a very strong. It motivates people who are already in the shul praying to really realize how important their prayer is. But it also, for us Amcha out there who aren't in shul enough, it's like look, either you're doing the thing or you're a pagan, like you're an idolater.
I'll also just say we have Justin being a bit of a misnagid here, being a bit hard on the people. I'll say that if you're a practicing Jew stuck in a location without a minion, you can also invite the stars and the cosmos and the constellations to pray with you, and they'll make up your minion. So
They'll make you a minion, yeah.
Don't let Justin's hellfire get to you.
Just summon my inner Lithuanian, like Alana has this my wife was a rabbi. She has a collection, or I bought her a collection of medieval sermons, and they're just like you'd imagine. They're just like, we merit to be murdered by the Crusaders because we deserve nothing, and we are horrible. It's just like the most. It's like it's like medieval sermons, and I always tell her she always like lots and lots of service about what she's gonna preach for holidays, and I always said she just start reading one of those sermons as if it's her sermon. And just like wait for the people, because I think everyone will be like, "Oh my God!" Like,
right,
we're such awful sinners, and we should merit to eat dirt, and then go into her actual sermon. But
sin is in the hands of an angry God.
It's true. Yeah, the Puritans in the Litvaks would have gotten. They
would have had a lot of fun together.
They have a lot of I'd love to see the condemnations going back and forth between them.
No, but she's got to, instead of like reading a bit of the sermon and then like switching to a real thing, read like a segment and then just walk down.
Yeah, we're done. Yeah, like telling how it is, throwing down,
giving you the truth, people.
Yeah, it really is worth and again, this is like, because where are they going to go? The modern rabbis have to be careful because they'll just like pack up and go to the shul. In the Middle Ages, like, where are you going to go?
Yeah,
like so they could just when you have a captive audience and tenure, basically, you can just condemn people right in front of you to their face. These days, no, they'll pack up and go to the shul and give them their money.
I for one am very glad that we as a people had someone like the Baal Shem Tov who came to shut down that form of preaching. Some here in the audience may have liked it to have gone on a little longer. I'm getting a sense.
No, I can't imagine. No one's on my team here. I'm fine.
What I'm loving here, to get back to the text, what I'm loving here is this. It seems like there's almost this very, very natural stream of consciousness that's bringing us from one paragraph to the next, and we're really moving. And I recommend for those that have the time and the interest to, once we've gone through this text once with you, to go back and to watch how each thing moved very beautifully into the next. And I think the imagery of water flowing is both what we're speaking about here explicitly, but also implicitly. It's the way the text is moving from one blessing to the next and from one theme to the next, and it's all kind of very nicely connected here.
Absolutely. To me, it feels very much like a conversation. It feels like a bunch of people at dinner talking, and
right.
Talking after dinner or whatever is never going to be totally scripted. So,
which is precisely what it is.
Yep, that's what it is.
It's the original podcast.
Yeah. You want to do the next one, or do you want me to pick it up?
Go for it.
I can do my hellfire now.
Nice.
Consequently, right? It's no joke. Consequently, it logically follows. It is forbidden for anyone to bless a person before offering his prayer, before doing Baruch Hu, drawing upon his head the Shekhinah. If he hastens to bless someone first, he draws upon that person an idolatrous cult. Right?
What a great translation here.
It is a bama, right? It's like how would you translate it?
Well, bama is literally a raised place.
Right.
It's like a bima.
It's like a high place. I think they translate a high place in the Bible.
It's a high place where sacrifices were offered to the various cults. Idolatrous cult does not mean a bunch of hippies doing it means something very different in that context when it means in today's context. It means a place where ancient Near Eastern sacrifices were offered to our God, basically.
Right. It's just, it's again, some more religious xenophobia. But again, if he hastens to bless someone else, he draws upon that person the opposite of Shekhinah, right? He draws upon that person a bama, right? Shekhinah bama, like draws upon them a like I don't know what the good translation is.
Idolatrous altar or something.
Yeah, an idolatrous altar instead of et. Therefore, and again, notice right, it draws upon them, not upon you. Like it's really bad, right? Theoretically, it should draw upon you, the bama, right, but not upon them. But therefore, for the celestial angels written, bless God, whereas for us there is an additional et. So yeah, you get the again like this. The consequences that really die here, and this is sort of the same reversal we had before, right? Where the dream had contents that were actually for someone else, not the person having the dream, which is sort of a strange thing we don't think about. But here it's the case, right, that if you don't say Baruch Hu and call down, right, the power of Shekhinah on your head, and if you bless someone else without having had done that, it calls down, right, or calls down an idolatrous cult site, a high place, or whatever. I don't know what the right term is. But it's interesting, right? Because whereas you're trying to bless them, you curse them.
Yeah. I mean, Matt actually puts it very, very nicely and concisely. He says that by greeting another human being before acknowledging God, before acknowledging the Shekhinah, what you're doing is you're idolizing that person. You're placing them before God, and you're turning them into an idol, which is not a nice thing to do to someone else.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, don't do that.
Sorry. Just one more thing here. This Matt also points us back to that in the Talmud Berachot 14a, which is a very, very beautiful section of the Talmud, which then gets picked up again in Hasidic texts of Chidlu lachem min ha'adam asher neshama be'apoi ki b'ameh nechshafo, that separate yourself from the human who has just wind in his nostrils, because with what is he accounted for? What value is he? Instead, turn your faith to God, essentially. And the rabbis in the Talmud read that as, don't read it for what is he worthy, but that he becomes a bama, he becomes this idolatrous cult site if you greet and praise him before you want to greet and praise God. And therefore we begin our day by praying, and that way, again, playing very beautifully with this verse, we move the neshama, we move the breath from our nostrils, and we spread it throughout our whole body, and that's what's done in the act of prayer, and then we're ready to engage with the world. So this idea of the cult site is an old rabbinic motif, which the Yanuka here is playing with.
Right. All right. So the Yanuka said, "Now I surely know that your weapons are fine, if you remember them and don't forget them." And
if you remember them.
right. If you remember them, right? Again, and he's taking credit for it, right? Because he, it's only because of him that at least according, that Eliezer remembered them. Certainly, the power of a man who wages war is in his lance and sword. Again, more backhanded compliments from the Yanuka, right? Like, yeah, you're good with that as long as you don't forget your lance that I reminded you of.
Right.
You're
totally right, by the way. Like, you can forget where your keys are, you can forget where you put your earphones, but like, if you forget where your lance is,
yeah,
then you're a whole different pot of worry.
Yeah, it's again, more great compliments from the Yanuka.
Yeah.
What is meant by mighty in strength, fulfilling his word, heeding the sound of his word? Rabbi Eliezer said, I've already said, right? We've already covered this verse. Why am I being asked to go over this again?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the Yanuka said, I know for sure that the power of your arm has weakened. Right. So it's the moment that he praised him. And he's like, well, so much for that.
I praised too soon.
Yeah, praised too soon. You're right. So much for that. Yeah. So now is not the time to wait, but to strike with the sling, stone after stone, as it is said, with sling and stone hurriedly, one after another. Right. So you got to keep the onslaught going.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Eliezer rejoiced, and Rabbi Abba and the companions rejoiced. So they're cheering him on, right? They're like, absolutely, we gotta keep the fight up. This is fantastic.
What are they rejoicing about there? I didn't fully get what was going on there.
I think that they're like I mean, can you imagine if Rabbi Elazar said, "Yeah, I already covered that," and the Yanuka's like, "Yeah, you okay, done." No, they're like, no, they're hungry for more Torah. They want the battle to continue.
But they usually rejoice after he gives a good piece of Torah, not when he just tells them that they should have given. You know, he didn't do any Torah here. I mean, he quoted a verse, but he was just basically saying, "Keep hitting, like strike while it's hot," and then they turn back and rejoice. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting them
Yeah.
to return with some Torah, or
Oh,
for him to
maybe
tell
it's
them.
sort of an invitation, right? They're yeah, maybe it's like, yeah, you, right? You know, because it's been Rebbe Elazar on the hot seat for the
Right,
past while. And
right,
so now it's like, all right, and again, the weapons that he quotes, right? It's Elazar always having the lance or some other
uh-huh,
kind of weapon, but he's always with the slingshot.
uh-huh.
And the fact that I think he mentioned the slingshot means that he's about to take up arms.
He's the David against the Goliath.
Right. Right.
It's also interesting that the rejoicing is split up here, right? It's Rabbi Lezer rejoiced and Rabbi Abba and the companions rejoiced. It's and I was wondering if there might be something there with the separating of the group. Maybe
Yeah.
he rejoiced and they saw that he was rejoicing, so they were like not sure. Do we
Yeah. They
laugh
took
at
his
this one? Do
lead.
we not? And they take his lead. Like he rejoices, like, oh, sure. They
Yeah. Yeah.
go
Maybe they're
on.
like, yeah, kind of. I think we do that, right? We like wait to
Sure, of
see
course.
what the
Who's going to applaud first?
yeah, who's going to applaud first, and so we make
Yeah,
sure we don't applaud at the wrong moment.
right.
So yeah, I think that maybe it's that. And it's also like the fact that Rabbi Elazar is really taking all the heat here, and Rabbi Abba and the rest of the Chavraya are just like sitting back with their hands crossed, watching this go down.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
again, you get the imagery. I think again the medieval imagery of the duel,
Mm,
right? That you have a kind of crowd of people surrounding two
mm,
fighters and sort of a
mm,
trial by combat or something,
mm.
and they're both kind of going at each other. And I think that's sort of the image that at least it evokes for me.
Yeah. You also don't want to jump in there unless you're in there. Like you kind of, when you're tapped in, you can move in, but you want to, like, you're either going to be in or out, and like they're I hear what you're saying, that they're kind of comfortably on the side, and they're allowing Rabbi Elazar to take the brunt of it.
And maybe he's the only one that can. I mean, maybe it's the case that
Mm, mm.
he's and he's not one of the ones that dies, is he? I always forget the ones that die, the three that die at the in the Idris Zutra. Like
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know if he's one of the ones that dies. Like, I don't think I forget which ones, because there are three that that sort of ecstatically die at the end of that one. So I can't remember if he's one or not. But
It's a good way to go.
yeah, it's maybe the best way to go. The kiss of God.
Patach Yanuka v'Omar. Should we go on?
Let's see. I mean,
Oh, we're coming on time here. You're right.
yeah, we're at time, and this is like sort of the end. That's really the nice end of that section.
Yeah.
Because then we open up with this all the Song of Psalms stuff,
Mm,
which I think would be a lot of time to get through. And it's also we shouldn't rush through anything.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't like the idea of rushing through anything.
Yeah. I think this is a good place, actually.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll get to some beautiful Song of Songs stuff next time,
Yeah.
which will be nice. Um,
Awesome.
Great. Yeah, so that gets us through that part. I mean, again, this is like we spent some time last time in the muck of sort of internecine war, and now we've ascended into the heavens. And I don't know. I haven't read to the end yet, or it's been a long time since I've read the entire Yanuka. And I wonder, I'm beginning to wonder, how it's going to come to an end, because clearly we're getting down to where, within the last few pages of it. So I wonder if it's going to begin to mount up, or if we're just going to kind of trace it out. I wonder how it's going to go. But this is a nice section. And again, I like to get back to the Yanuka stuff where he's making fun of them.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want him to get too saintly and mellowed out, right?
No. He needs to be like a little precocious prima donna kid.
Right.
Yeah, again, I think this section is really interesting. Just to wrap it up, is that it kind of brings us back to the. I mean, we're operating at this very high metaphysical level, right? And this very very difficult literary level, but also just in the sort of daily back and forth of prayer, right? We've gotten into some really, really deep things that traditional Jews would have been doing every day,
Yeah.
do every day.
Yeah.
And that it shows that no, not only the things you're doing every day, not only are you just doing them in shul, but there's this huge supernal ramification
Yeah.
for you having done them. And so
Yeah.
in that way, we're moving these different registers. We're moving from the metaphysical registers, the textual registers, but also the liturgical register,
Yeah.
the halachic register. And we don't typically think of the Zohar as a kind of a halachic text, but it does have halachic implications.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's ever how one wants to read those. I think that's an important. This is not just a gutta. This is not just that. There's really important practical halachic implications to all this.
Yeah. And I think it's doing a lot of work also sociologically or societally, where it's giving a lot of power to people who are bereft of any power, right? And at the time when this is being read and written throughout the ages, to people who have really no autonomy and are very, I mean, you covered some of the Inquisition now in your work, which was not only targeting Jews and not primarily, but certainly also included them. And to take the downtrodden Jew who has no autonomy and power, and quite to the contrary in the terrestrial realm, and tell them that no, in your spiritual service, you're doing something greater than any kingdom and greater than any war, and you're causing the angels to praise God, you're causing God to be exalted. I think it does a lot to the spirit of a broken people, and keeps them going for centuries.
No, you're right, and I think it's an important corrective to, and again, it's sort of the anti-Maimonides in a way that Maimonides really, as much as it has such clear intellectual and analytic power, it can really take the wind out of your sails if you believe in a certain kind of theology. And this is really putting the wind back into the sails of that theology in an incredibly thoroughgoing, in a way that's never been exhausted.
Yes, correct. That still continues to be a pull of blessing, as we put it, till today.
Right. So I think that's a great, again, both of these texts, are to me very, very important for very different reasons, and they both deserve their. So I'm certainly glad we're going through this and commenting on it out loud rather than going to the guide. That would be a real tear.
I did my time on the guide for a while, and
you've done you paid your dues. You paid your dues. You have for sure. If any of us have. All right, everybody. Well, we'll pick up next week, and we'll be coming down to the end. I suspect we're going to be at least 2 more sessions before we finish the Yanuka actual our finishing of it, and then we're going to have some kind of, hopefully, a little special wrap up session, sort of to wrap the whole learning up. But I suspect we have at least 2 more sessions with the Yanuka before we wrap things up. But all right, everybody. Well, see folks tomorrow. We're going to cover taking a look at the Inquisition. Zevi, you got more of the philosophy series coming out today?
Yeah, I have one that's going to go out when we're done here. I'm taking a bit of a break from my own content production because I'm working on a different project here in Jerusalem, and so meanwhile we have the big philosophy collab, where we got philosophers here to send in their 2-minute responses to the same question, and that's we'll see how that unfolds. Hopefully people will enjoy it.
Yeah, it's really neat. I think it's such a cool project. So,
thank you.
All right, folks, we'll make sure to check that out. And otherwise than that, I'll see folks tomorrow for a very cheery Inquisition episode, and then we'll be back next week for more content. But until then, folks, have a great day, and thank you so much for joining us as we travel and learn from the Yanuka.